Elite Facts presents
Top 9 film cliches still used today.
9.
Henchmen Cant Aim. What the hell is it with the henchmen in action films who always seem to just miss their target? Like seriously, without fail, in almost every single action film from the 1980s and 90s, there's always a scene in which our hero manages to get out of the grasp of the villain or infiltrates the villain's lair and is fired upon by every single evil henchman in the room, and yet they all somehow miss. This is a cliche that was pretty much born in the 1980s, as any action hero from the 80s was pretty much bulletproof or untouchable. Unless you're Officer Murphy at the beginning of RoboCop, in which case getting shot dead leads up to you becoming a stronger hero. The biggest and most ridiculous culprit for this cliche is the testosterone-filled action film Commando. There is literally a scene towards the film's climax in which Arnold Schwarzenegger runs across a large yard that's surrounded by hundreds of henchmen who all fail to hit Arnold. Plus, they're all surrounding him and standing across from one another. They should at least be hitting a few of each other with bullets. This is so damn cheesy that it's frickin' awesome.
8.
Tripping up in a horror film. Without fail, if you're running away in a horror film and you trip and fall down, you ain't getting back up right away. Hell, there's probably a high chance you won't survive at all. This trope saw popularity back in the 1960s, although it was used in horror films prior to this. In the film Night of the Living Dead, where main protagonist and certified damsel in distress Barbara trips over virtually nothing in one of the film's opening scenes. Ever since then, this trope has been used countless times in the horror films that followed, to the point where it's just turned into a joke. Survivors and victims aren't the only ones who succumb to this trope. No, just look at Ghostface from the Scream films. He trips over virtually nothing every other minute. How he was able to get 3 sequels and a TV series is beyond us.
7.
Presumed dead. You're probably going to see a few horror tropes on this list, but it must be said that although this one is seen in a lot of horror films, it's not just restricted to horror films. This cliche involves the main villain of the film being defeated in some way, shape, or form, only to then return either later on in the film or at the end of the movie with one last chance to take out our heroes. As we've said, horror films are a major culprit for this one. Just look at the Friday the 13th and Halloween films. Those franchises are built on the whole presumed dead cliche. That's why there's so many of the bloody films. This cliche has been done so many times before that most people in the theater end up shouting, "He ain't dead!" Seriously, can we stop this cliche? While we're on the subject, we wouldn't mind watching at least one film in theaters without someone shouting out during it.
6.
Out of ammo. Why is it that in most action films, during the shootout at the climax, the hero always runs out of ammo? It would be understandable if it was a long shootout sequence, but it seems that when you're watching these long sequences at other times during these movies, the hero never runs out of ammo, hardly ever needs to reload his gun, and if he does reload, he pretty much pulls the ammo out of nowhere. But when we get to the climax of the film, oh no, I'm suddenly out of ammo. It just seems really convenient that not only does the hero run out of ammo when they finally get their hands on the main villain, but they also never seem to have anticipated or planned for what would happen if they actually did run out of ammo. It's just really, really annoying.
5.
Last minute backup, third shooter. Oh, but don't worry if you're out of ammo. Backup always shows up just in the nick of time to save the hero, like without fail. If the hero runs out of ammo at the end of the film, 95% of the time it's guaranteed that backup is going to be there ready to save them. As we said earlier, really convenient. Oh, and by the way, how come the backup always arrives after the main character is just knocked off like 50 frickin' people? Thanks for coming in and taking credit for taking out the bad guy at the last minute. Appreciate it.
4.
Vehicles. Okay, we're just going to bundle a few of these cliches into one. Why is it that when the hero of the film needs a vehicle, they're always able to find a car that's not only unlocked, but it miraculously has a full tank of gas and the keys are stored somewhere around the driver's seat? Why is this a common thing? Are there people who actually store their keys in the passenger side mirror instead of actually carrying the keys around with them like a normal person does? Not to mention leaving it unlocked on top of all that. That's just asking for someone to steal your car. Oh, and what about the opposite scenario that we see commonly in horror films, where the car is either locked or won't start or is completely out of gas? Like, how unlucky must someone be to not only be in a situation where they're being chased down by a crazed serial killer, but they also manage to get in a car that either has no fuel in the tank or simply won't start for whatever random reason? That's not to say that some films don't explain why this happens. Look at Friday the 13th Part 3. At least they show a motorcycle gang siphoning gas from the protagonist's van halfway through the film, so you know why it's out of gas. But if you watch most other films with this cliche, you're guaranteed to have no explanation whatsoever for the lack of gas or inability to start.
3,
Large vehicles are indestructible. Terminator 2 Judgment Day. That's all. Okay, we're not going to leave the video like that, but that scene in Terminator 2 is a prime example, as that semi-truck that the T-1000 drives halfway through the film just annihilates anything in its path before flying into the storm drain. I mean, fair enough, the only thing that does stop it in the film is the solid concrete it crashes into, but still, that truck was able to survive jumping off of a frickin' overpass, smashing through an abandoned car obscuring its path in the storm drain, for some reason, not to mention the many shotgun blasts that would realistically screw up the engine of any vehicle. Oh, but this isn't just for Terminator 2 and semi-trucks. If you have a large, heavy vehicle in an action film, odds are it's indestructible. Other examples include Terminator 3 and A View to a Kill, which both involve fire engine chase action sequences, GoldenEye, which includes a tank chase, which is cheating a little bit, but still, the bus from Speed, and pretty much every large vehicle you'll find in the Mad Max franchise. Just make sure these vehicles don't have any explosive fluids attached to them, and make sure that they have their brakes checked. Those two things always seem to be kryptonite to large vehicles in films.
2,
The military and police are useless. What is it with filmmakers making the military and police inferior to the everyday man when it comes to situations that military and police are trained for, or would at least have a better chance of dealing with than the average everyman if it's a more unlikely scenario? Like, seriously, most zombie films always give the assumption that military forces don't last long when dealing with the undead, yet there's always the most inexperienced and useless person in the zombie apocalypse who managed to survive till the end of the film. Like, how? For example, we know Eugene from The Walking Dead was tagging along with Abraham and Rosita, who at least had some military experience, but you'd think with how foolish and useless Eugene was in many of the episodes that he wouldn't be in the show for long. Nope, 3 seasons later and he's still alive. He even outlived Abraham. Sure, he's come out of his shell, but how did he manage to survive so long, yet the military fell pretty fast at the start of the apocalypse? Or how about in Return of the Living Dead, yeah, another zombie film, where the police keep getting tricked into sending more and more cops into the zombie-infested graveyard, and it never occurs to them to bring out heavier weaponry when doing so. Not to mention, in that film, the military's solution to the outbreak is to just nuke the area the outbreak is taking place in. That only makes the situation worse, as the smoke that rises from the area contains infected chemicals, which then transition into a form of acid rain, thus starting the outbreak up all over again. Like, seriously, why are the police and military so useless in these films?
1,
Villains. Now, this is a cliche that's still being used to this very day. Why can't Hollywood figure out how to write more realistic and more down-to-earth villains into their films? Now, don't get us wrong here. Cheesy villains are probably one of the best things ever. I mean, who doesn't like a bit of cheese every now and then? But the cheesy villains can get to be a bit too much, as we rarely see any villains who are portrayed realistically. Instead, we get stereotypical antagonists who have either some form of facial disfigurement or the most overdone foreign accent known to man. These sort of villains, as funny as they are, always ruin a serious film. But do you really want to know what tops this trope off? Overused one-liners. Granted, both the cheesy villain and the one-liners worked perfectly well together in most of the early James Bond films. Take Goldfinger, for example. The villain was essentially a product of the time the film was created in, so it worked really well. Not to mention the "No, Mr. Bond, I expect you to die" line is just awesome. But that line has been parodied and used countless times, to the point where if you were to watch Goldfinger now, you just end up cringing at that line due to how cliched it is. How about other overused lines like, "If I told you, I'd have to kill you," or "Any last words?" And even the classic, "We're not so different, you and I." Seriously, cheesy films are awesome, but come on, it's 2016. We need more realistic villains in our films. Get to work, Hollywood.
Don't forget to like us and subscribe for more elite facts.